All right, and I'm going to do something that I haven't done in a long time, and that is share my screen. See if I can do it. And I cannot. Wait a minute, 1 second. Okay, there we go. And this is for story time. And today's story time comes from a little bit of our Western, while I'm vamping, our Western New York history. February is Black History Month. And in honor of Black History Month, I have a little story to tell you. And hold on 1 second. Let's see if I can show this as a PowerPoint. There we go. How's that look? Good? Thumbs up? Thumbs up. Good. All right. So this is a story called Rosetta Rosetta, Sit by Me. And this is by Linda Valvord, illustrated by Eric Velasquez. And it's abridged by the Reverend Michelle Yates and edited by myself. Hello, my name is Rosetta. When I was 6 or 7, Papa was away giving speeches in England, and he was a famous man who spoke out against slavery. His name was Frederick Douglass. Papa was away. When Papa was away, I wanted to go to school, but my mama didn't send me to school because she needed my help looking after my 3 brothers while she made shoes for a local shoe factory. When we moved to Rochester, New York, Papa looked into my going to public school. He was told I could only go to the all-black school on the other side of town, too far from me to walk, and not the all-white school in my own neighborhood. So here I was on the way to Miss Tracy's, a private school. Miss Tracy's female seminary wasn't far from our house, but it seemed very far to me. Papa would have walked with me, but he was in Ohio giving speeches against slavery. I was afraid, since all the other students would be white. Even though I'm already 9 years old, I have never attended a real school before. When I arrived at school, a teacher led me past classrooms with other girls to a quiet, empty classroom. She pointed to a desk and gave me several books. You will study these, she said. Then she left me. A long time passed. Did I misunderstand? I didn't know what to do, so I opened the books. I heard the other girls going outside for recess. A teacher came in. Well, will I go outside and play? I asked. No, Rosetta. I'm here to look at your work. She opened the book. Do this page. I didn't cry or argue. I just did the page. When the recess was over and the school was full again, the teacher came back and she looked at my work and nodded. Very good. Now you may go outside. It's your turn to play. But everyone is finished. I wouldn't have anyone to play with. Never mind that. This is your recess, said the teacher. Under a big tree, I sat on the swing. I saw the other girls look at me out the window, and one of them waved. Then the teacher came to the window. She motioned to the girl to sit down. I felt very sad and ashamed. My first day of school was very, very hard. Papa hadn't said I would be all alone. What could I do? If I told Mama, she would be mad at the school and keep me home. Papa would help me, and he would want me to be brave. I would wait for Papa to come home in about 2 weeks. At last, Papa returned. After we all got big hugs and kisses, he sat with me and looked in my eyes, looked me in the eyes. How did you go? How did school go? How did it go in school, Rosetta? I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. They kept me all alone in a room by myself. No one teaches me. They wouldn't let me play with the other girls at recess, and I even eat lunch all by myself. I sobbed into his big arms. Then we shall go together tomorrow, you and I, he said. And we did just that. My daughter says that she is kept away from the other pupils. Is this true? Papa asked. Yes, it is, Miss Tracy replied coldly. If I had done otherwise, it would be an it would have injured my school and its reputation. We are a private school. We are obligated to observe the wishes of the parents. If you were going to exclude my daughter, you should have told me that in the beginning. Papa firmly reminded Miss Tracy that he had paid tuition like the other parents. Miss Tracy grew flustered. There would be opposition to your daughter sitting in the white classroom. I don't believe that, said Papa. Let us ask the students. Very well, then. I will put the question to them. To my surprise, Miss Tracy led us to the classroom. I looked at the faces of the white girls. The girls, Mr. Douglas is here to see if his daughter may be in this class. How many of you want Rosetta to be in your class? The arm of every single girl shot into the air. No, you don't understand. How many of you feel that Rosetta Douglas should be allowed to come into this class as a pupil? Again, every girl lifted her hand in the air. I do, they called. Miss Tracy grew red-faced and flustered. Where would she sit then? She demanded. The girls started to compete. Next to me. No, let her sit here. Rosetta, Rosetta, sit by me. Hmm. Well, that evening, without telling us, Miss Tracy called a parents' meeting. Miss Tracy asked how many parents wanted me to be enrolled. All the hands went up except for one, Mr. Horatio G. Warner, the editor of the Rochester Courier, the newspaper. I do not believe this enrollment is suitable. It betrays the boundaries that society and nature have set in place for the education of our youth. Mr. Warner went on about how Papa was not from Rochester and had just come to bother the good citizens there. After his long speech, Miss Tracy took another vote. And you all are getting in the way of me. I gotta move this thing again. Okay, there we go. All right, here we go. Just move this over. Getting used to Zoom again. Again, all the parents except Mr. Warner voted to have me come to the school. Miss Tracy said, since there is one objection, Rosetta will not be allowed. I'm responsible for a safe, peaceful environment, and this is a threat to our peace. Miss Tracy met me on the steps of the school the next day. Rosetta, you are no longer a student here. Please return home. I just stood there. She had to tell me twice to go back home. I fled so fast that no one could see the tears of shame stinging my eye. Where will I go now? I asked after telling my parents what happened. You will go to the best school we can find, said Papa. Though Mama hoped to keep me safe, away from more turmoil. The very day that very day, my father communicated with the Mott sisters in Albany about having me there for that school year. Children of all genders and races learned together there. Papa and I were on the train to Albany that very evening. While I was away, Papa did not let up on Mr. Warner or the Rochester schools. He told the story in his newspaper, The North Star, seen by readers both black and white across the country, including a young lawyer named Abraham Lincoln. Papa kept up the pressure. Every year for 9 years, he asked the Rochester School Board for special meetings to reconsider the question of how they segregated their schools. When I came back to Rochester, I had a baby sister, Annie, and Papa hired a private tutor to come to the house each day to teach my siblings and I. When I was 15, I attended Oberlin College and became a teacher. Sometimes my students were adults who worked during the day and came to learn in the evenings. One day in 1857, my father flew into the coffee shop where I was talking with friends. Rosetta, Rosetta, we've done it. We've won. The Rochester Public School Board is going to let Annie enter our local school for first grade. School segregation is over in Rochester. I saw the tears in Papa's eyes. 9 years of steady protest had made a difference. I hoped that Annie would have a moment like I did all those years ago of cheerful voices calling, "Sit by me." And that is the story of Rosetta Douglas, "Sit by Me." So what I love most about that story is that it's not so much East Aurora history, but our history, because that is what Black history is. It's all of our history. And it did have an impact on Western New York, desegregating schools across the counties. So, with that being said, let us go into our sermon today, I Choose Love. So, before I get into this sermon, let us watch a video of this song entitled I Choose Love, in which this sermon is based on. So if we can play the video, I Choose Love.
In the midst of pain, I choose love. In the midst of pain, I choose love.
Hmm. That was I Choose Love by Mark Miller, with lyrics by Lindy Thompson. And Mark Miller is a Methodist Episcopalian um, music director, choir director, songwriter, um, and and Lindy Thompson is a poet and lyricist. And I Choose Love, they chose these words. In the midst of pain, I choose love. In the midst of pain, sorrow falling down like rain, I await the sun again. I choose love. In the midst of war, I choose peace. In the midst of war, hate and anger keeping score, I will seek the good once more. I choose peace. And then when my world falls down, I will rise. When my world falls down, explanations can't be found. I will climb to holy ground. I will rise. With these words, and you know, there's a reason why I said choose love and things like that. There's a reason why I'm talking about Frederick Douglass, not because I'm a big fan of his, but his birthday was on Friday, Valentine's Day was his birthday. And it was also Valentine's Day. And it's also a time where love is everywhere and then love is nowhere. Sometimes it's a rough time for some and a happy time for others. Um, but this whole notion of choosing love in the time of pain is hard to do. Choosing peace in the time of war, I think is easy to do, but that's because I like to choose war. I'll get into that in a second. But the one thing that I want to ask you, and I'm not gonna get a response here, but what is breaking your heart right now? Is anything breaking your heart at this time? And what areas in your life do you need more love in? What areas in your life do you need more love in? And also, what is breaking your heart? So, what is ever coming up for you right now? Just keep that close. Because as a scholar of Black history and music, this year, my heart is breaking. And that is because Black History Month has faced challenges. And a lot of the challenges come from federal agencies and some companies that have cut back on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Mind you, that this is the month of inclusion that we are dealing with our Soul Matters and our worship services. But federal agencies like the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, issued a memo recently, about a month or so ago, that paused all activities related to Black History Month. And this included other observances like Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Juneteenth, and also Pride Month. Other federal agencies followed the DIA's lead and modified rules for employee resource groups, affinity groups, and cultural awareness events. Some companies voluntarily cut back on DEI initiatives and efforts promoting Black History Month. Some of the arguments are that, you know, that Black history is being framed as controversial. Black history as controversial. And similar arguments to that critical race theory stuff. Other arguments are highlighting that highlighting diverse experiences in American history is divisive rather than uniting, or unifying. It's divisive. And I quote, these programs divided Americans by race, wasted taxpayers' dollars, and resulted in shameful discrimination. But arguments for Black History Month is that it is a way to recognize the achievements of Black Americans. I'm sorry, but history cannot be erased, even if there are attempts to minimize it. Black history is important to explore, even if parts of it are disturbing. We must remember, reconcile, in order to understand and shape a future forward together. Black History Month will never be erased because we won't allow it. Well, welcome to Professor Robinson's African American History class. I will engage in African American history for the next hour. I'm just joking. Give me about 10 minutes. Just give me 10 minutes, not an hour. But speaking of Frederick Douglass, Frederick Douglass himself, who celebrated, I said, a birthday a couple of days ago, was a student of history and studied slave rebellions and why they didn't work and why they were not a good strategy for liberation. He often argued with his good buddy, John Brown, and he was citing history to support his arguments. I mean, they were gentlemen, of course. And he would cite two thwarted rebellions, one by Gabriel Prosser in Virginia, and the other by Denmark Vesey in South Carolina. And that they were over before they had even began, and the alleged leaders were executed. And the backlash to the enslaved community that followed just really said to Frederick Douglass that this is not the way to end slavery, especially the Denmark Vesey Rebellion in South Carolina. And Vesey had reminded Frederick Douglass of himself. They were both formerly enslaved people, both charismatic, both powerful leaders, and both who understood that true freedom is freedom for all. But Vesey's plan led to peril without even going forward, and things got worse. Things did not change. On receiving word of the plot in South Carolina, Charleston authorities mobilized quickly and arrested Vesey and his men. Out of 131 men that were arrested and charged with conspiracy, 67 were convicted and 35 were hanged, including Vesey himself. Again, a plot did not happen. It did not take place, but people were executed nevertheless. Black men were executed. And Vesey was a pastor of a church. He had co-established a church in Charleston, South Carolina, where enslaved people and free people of color were meeting together. Well, that church was burned down to the ground. Ultimately, Douglass declined John Brown's offer to raid Harper's Ferry and fought the good fight a different way. He was moved by the power of love that he witnessed in his life, and including the experiences of his daughter, of which story I just told. Instead of choosing violence, Douglass recruited soldiers for the war, the Civil War. You're like, wait a minute. He said, don't choose violence, but he recruited soldiers for the war. Well, in fact, Douglass had used the story of Denmark Vesey as a rallying cry that they were fighting the war not alone, but in segregated units. And when they entered the war, the shift of the war, excuse me, the focus of the war shifted, and it became more than preserving the power of the federal government and the Union, but more about freedom. So even though violent war is violent, they were on the side of freedom. They were fighting on the side of love, and the lines were clear, especially when they entered. So freedom did come, And I argued that it did come because of Black soldiers entering into the war and everybody fighting not for this government in DC, but for freedom. And freedom came in 1865. And in that same year, the congregation of Denmark Vesey in Charleston, South Carolina, came out from hiding. Yeah, they had been meeting secretly ever since their sanctuary had been burned down. But it was rebuilt based on a design of which was drawn by Denmark Vesey's son. When it was formally reorganized, it acquired the name Emmanuel, and the church became affiliated with the African Methodist Episcopal AME Church. So the Emmanuel AME Church. As Douglas used the legacy of Vesey to turn the tides of war, so did the congregation of Emmanuel AME through the long struggle of civil rights and equity in South Carolina. But at the 193rd year anniversary of when Vesey's rebellion was allegedly supposed to have occurred, June 17th, 2015, it was a Wednesday, and the congregation was gathered for a regular Wednesday night Bible study, as most AME churches do. And Dylan Roof, a white supremacist, entered, sat with them for a while, and then proceeded to shoot them. 9 souls were lost that evening, including the pastor of the church, which I discovered is a distant cousin of mine. My father's from Charleston, South Carolina. In the midst of pain, I choose love. How would a congregation, after a tragedy like that was based on hatred? We have Dylan Roof's manifesto to prove why. And he targeted this church especially because of his legacy in the civil rights movement and the rebellion that did not take place. What did they do, this church? Well, they chose love. Mark Miller, who wrote that song that we played at the beginning of this, was so moved by them not going to hatred, but by going to love in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of pain, that he wrote this song. In the midst of war, in the midst of pain, in the midst of brokenness, we choose love. We choose community. And way to share this message than through song of I choose love. Mark Miller said to them and to this, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. As Jesus said when they divided up his clothes and casted lots. That story and that example of choosing love in the midst of pain was so moving that Mark Miller said this. With it comes the realization that if the question of full inclusion is ultimately one of justice, then there is no middle way. We either choose love or we don't. We either love people not regardless of who they are, but precisely because of who they are, no differently than any of us seeks to be loved, or we don't. The choice of love to love is not dependent on those who agree with me. The power of love God's love is that agreement has nothing to do with it because if it did, it wouldn't be love at all. Love is to be given. Love is to be received freely and without reservation or condition. And that is actually from Johnny Geffords. So in the midst of pain, I choose love. In the midst of pain, sorrow falling down like rain, I await the sun again. I choose love. The pain of watching his daughter being denied education, Frederick Douglass chose love. In the midst of war, I choose peace. In the midst of war, hate and anger, keeping score, I will seek the good once more. I choose peace. In the midst of war, the Vasey congregation chose peace. They met in secret and they kept their love going. Douglas chose to fight on the side of peace, the side of freedom and liberty and justice for all, until we are able to lay down that sword and shield by the riverside and study war no more. Our goal is that we're going to have to not have to fight anymore and to be in peace. When the world falls down, I will rise. When my world falls down, explanations can't be found. I will climb to holy ground. I will rise. The Vasey congregation, Emmanuel AME Church rose and forgave. No explanation. Yes, there was a manifesto, but still did not explain it. And they sought for holy ground to rise, forgive, and move forward. And one example of this is the son of one of, and while I'm finding it because I lost my place, I got a little carried away. I'm sorry. But um, but yeah, I lost my place. I'll just continue on. So again, at the beginning of this sermon, I asked a question. I asked a question as to what is breaking your heart right now. And I also asked a question as to what areas in your life do you need to choose love or that you need more love in? If we can only remember these words that when we are in this midst of pain, we will choose love. So when we are in the midst of war, we will choose love by choosing peace. And if we have to fight, we fight on the side of love. No one said that we will never struggle, we can't struggle, or that we will just sit idly by while suffering and war is going on, but we will choose the side of peace and we will fight for that. When the world falls down, and sometimes it feels like it is doing it on a daily, sometimes on an hourly basis. But when your world falls down, not just the world, but when your world falls down, and we've all been there. If you haven't, just live a little bit longer. Rise. Choose love by rising. And if you are rising and someone else is falling, lift up as you climb. So, as I close, just remember in the next coming weeks, the next coming months, choose love and let us continue to learn from African American history. Amen. Amen. All right. With that being said, let us, I would say, rise in body or in spirit if we were in the sanctuary. But if you feel like rising, Feel free to go ahead. I am comfortable on my couch in my living room. I got my two cats next to me, and it will startle them if I get up and rise. So we're going to sing together the next hymn, and the next hymn is "Love Will Guide Us."
Love will guide us. Peace has dried us. Hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard life. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you can change the world with your love. Love will guide us. Peace has tried us. Hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard life. Love will guide us through the hard night.
That was a great rendition of that. And for our closing words, I bring you the words of William F. Schultz. This is the mission of our faith, to teach the fragile art of hospitality, to revere both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to witness to all that we must hold the world, that we must hold the whole world in our hands. Many blessings. Amen. And blessed be.
Now, please join me in extinguishing the chalice by saying the words printed in the order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our postlude is What the World Needs Now.
What the world needs now is love, sweet
just too little love.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone. Lord, we don't need another meadow. There are cornfields and wheat fields enough to grow. There are sunbeams and moonbeams enough to shine.
Oh, listen, Lord, if you want to know
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that is just too little. The world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, oh, but just for everyone. World needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for what the world needs now.
That concludes our service today. Have a great week and be careful out there. Reverend Vertus will stay on the line on the Zoom call for several minutes in case anybody wants to have a short conversation. Um, and then we will shut the Zoom down. Take care.
That
Good job.
was very nice. Thank you. I love that story. Thanks very much.
Yes, yes. Like there's actually a plaque um uh uh, uh commemorating this right in this in the city of Rochester where this happened, where the school used to be. But no one really knows about it. No one really hears
Yeah.
the story. So, I just the reason why I did the images because the illustrations are fantastic and
Yes, there.
so, but thank you.
Now, what happened to the school? Did it keep functioning?
No, it closed down
Yeah.
after a while it closed down because it was a private school and so
Right.
the public school system, particularly after the 50s and 60s took over
Yeah.
and so it was no longer a private school
Yeah.
after that. So,
Yeah. Very interesting story.
mm. But if you want to know about Rosetta lived on and remained a resident of Rochester and is buried in Mount Hope Cemetery. Her last
Ah.
name was Sprague. And I'm Facebook friends with a Jacqueline Sprague, one of her descendants,
Oh,
who also lives in
very good.
Rochester. So, yes, but
Yeah, it's wonderful how family traditions carry on like that. And um, yeah, great.
Do
Have a
you,
good week.
you too.
Vertus, do you know whether the victory that he won caused the integration of schools soon thereafter across
Yeah.
the board, or was it just a one-off with his daughter?
It wasn't a one-off. I don't know the exact ones, but it was a domino effect. So once Rochester's, then the county schools started to desegregate because people were coming in from because people were moving. There were more populations of Black folk moving in,
Mhm.
especially after the Civil War. They were no longer having to go to Canada. So they were stopping in New York. And so there were more populations. And with more populations, it became apparent to desegregate the schools. But then segregation happened in a different way by neighborhoods and the school in the neighborhood. So officially they were desegregated, but they were still segregated well up until now. They're still segregated.
Mm. Yeah.
They
Mm.
really are. It's a real problem. This is across Western New York.
Mhm.
Yeah, across the country. The segregation level in some areas is greater now than it was before the Supreme Court ruled that it was illegal.
Right.
And that's just because of the segregation of where people live.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's why they did programs like urban suburban interdistrict transfer program here in Rochester, in which they exported. It sounds like products or immigration or something like that. But they exported kids from the city out into the suburbs, and 9 times out of 10, the kids from the city were black and
Mhm.
brown, into the suburbs to desegregate the suburban school, which were predominantly white, and I was one of those kids. Like I think Vice President Kamala Harris was one. I was one of those kids. We are in the same generation. So, yeah.
Well, the urban suburban program, if that's the one that you're talking about in Rochester, was actually born out of the negotiations that occurred after the race riots
Right.
back in the 60s. That was something that was meant to kind of take a step toward integration, but it's such a small thing relative. So great that you were able to participate in that, but it's such a small
Yeah.
small number relative to the whole school system.
Yeah. I mean, most of my education, I was the only black person in the classroom.
Yeah.
Mm.
But I went to a black church because Sunday morning service is the most segregated time in America.
Oh, really?
Sunday morning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
Oh yeah. So that's part of my call to try to fix that much as I can,
Mm.
as I believe that our faith does save lives regardless of race.
That's interesting. You should say that. We had a person do a workshop for us several years ago, and when we put our Black Lives Matter uh, banner up during the George Floyd uh, times, um, she reached out to us and said that, she said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Well, for obvious reasons. Then we wanted to show solidarity, but also, we hope we have a vision that perhaps we'd have a much more diverse congregation." And her response was, "You will never have Black people come to your church." Just straight out. And I said, "Well, why is that?" And she said, um, Black people need church. This is her words, and she was an African American woman. Black people need church to get away from
Mm.
the pain and all the micro cuts that absorb from the predominant white society. And so they need to cry, they need to laugh, they need to find a respite. And so you will never be that place for them, and therefore you'll never integrate. And I just felt that that was such a cynical view of what could be.
Right.
Uh, but I don't know, maybe she's right. But
I would say that she's right and she's wrong. Never is a very strong word. Never is like, very absolute and obsolete. I mean, absolute, absolute, I would say. And I would never say never. I would never say never. I've seen it done. I've seen it. And it has been done within Unitarian Universalism. Tulsa, also DC. But it's very, very few and far between. What has to happen is that there has to be a like a coming down here and coming up here and meeting at the middle. There has to be a balance. And right now, predominantly Unitarian Universalist worship services are on the reflective, um, not sorrowful, not all the time, but really on the the inwards reflection, quiet, almost Zen-like. I mean, from Eastern traditions, Buddhist type of thing, and very, very much like puritanical worship services. Because we come from that lineage. We were the Puritans, we were the Pilgrims. That's ours. That's us. And so but then African Americans, and it's not all African Americans now, but African Americans, particularly with Southern roots, I mean, she's right. Their worship services are like a release. They're cathartic. That's why you see a lot of people crying. That's why I mean, I would see my father crying almost every service. But outside of that, no. But in service, it was his time to release, and and sometimes not release and sorrow, but release and joy. That's what's missing in a lot of Unitarian Universalist worship services. If we can find that joy, but also that balance, that I mean, not joyful all the time, because we do need to like feel what's going on. And some people, because of privileged lifestyles, are not really, face to face with oppression and pain, in the same ways that oppressed people are. And so that conversation needs to happen. And I believe that a marriage is definitely possible. And that's one of my ministries. How to
Yeah.
do that? I don't know yet. Figuring that out as we go along. So, that's why I love our value of transformation. Let's change and let's change again and let's change again. Keep that flag flying. Sorry for another sermon, but
Uh, Actually, I think it's white people who need educating. I've thought that for a long time. Black people know a heck of a lot more about us than we know about them. And in order to get together, we've got to educate ourselves. And that's why that class we had with Fritz was, I just found that invaluable, because he made us look at ourselves very gently, but he did. And I started reading on Black history, and I kept thinking, why wasn't I taught this? Because it's a very important part of American history. Why didn't I get this? And I had a great history teacher in high school, and I don't think he knew it. Otherwise, he would have taught it to us, because he was very open-minded. But I think that's part of it is, and a very big part of it is, that we have to learn Black history, as difficult as it is, and it is difficult to learn because there's an awful lot of violence in it and cruelty, but we have to learn it. And there are wonderful books out there, wonderful. One of the best ones was Heather McGee's The Sum of Us.
Yeah.
I was just floored when I read that book. I had no idea about the economic impact of racism on the entire country, not just Black people, but the entire country. And it is something that we have to learn. That's what distresses me so much about what's going on in the country now, is a denial of that, denial of learning, denial of Black history, denial of women's history. And it's setting us way, way back as far as creating harmony in the population.
I have a quick question. And it's a quick question, but because I saw in some of the records that you have done Jubilee training, um, um, and and I think that was maybe a couple of years ago, maybe a few years. It wasn't last summer, but
Are you talking about for the kids or the
the
adults?
adults.
Hmm.
Um, what we've done a couple of trainings. One was the one that Judy just referred to. We had a African American psychologist from New York City we did what was it, about 10 months long, Judy?
Yeah, it was on Zoom
Yeah,
because
we
he
did it
was
on
from
Zoom.
there and we would meet on Zoom on every other Tuesday night or something like that. And
Every couple of weeks, we'd meet
yeah,
for a couple hours with him and talk about race relations and how to create a bridge and so forth. Um, we also, during the run up to the change in section in Article 2, many of us were interested in learning more regarding the work of trying to change the seven principles. And so I think it ended up being 6 or 8 of us who went through. Oh, Rebecca, you went through that, didn't you? The weekend long, the 16 or 20 hour long training that can't remember the woman's name. She kind of spearheaded. She was on the Article 2 commission.
Oh, Paulico Jones.
Yes. So we about 6 or 8 of us went through that uh, run in the run up to the Article 2 changes. So that was a very, oh my gosh, it was a deep dive, but it was so eye opening.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed to say that I thought I knew a lot about this subject and therefore this was going to be kind of on the fringes, but there was so much I didn't know that I learned.
Yeah. So that's the Jubilee that what Paulico Jones does. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't widespread amongst the congregation. It was just uh, some individuals, several board members at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
several others.
Okay.
But that we certainly can build off of that, no doubt about it.
mhm,
Yeah.
Mhm. I mean, one thing that can be done and without going back and redoing things so that, so that we can continue to grow and spread the knowledge that, I mean, the one thing that we do is like whatever we learn to spread it, and to make sure that that is happening. But also there's a book called Mistakes and Miracles. Um, and Mistakes and Miracles was last year's UU Common Read. And Mistakes and Miracles, and I know both authors, and I mean, they have this guide to like a workshopy type of guide that I did a small group ministry on that with about 20 people, and when I was in Vermont, and each chapter deals with a congregation that had either mistakes and or miracles when it comes down to integration
Hmm.
and and inclusion and the diversity efforts. The mistakes are like, okay, yeah, just like sometimes obvious, but it's just like, but we keep on doing the same stuff. And that's the thing about it, is just like, people have, I mean, and then the miracles are there too. Tulsa, also DC, Davies, in Maryland. These are, I mean, and they're still, really functioning places. And there are some places like Atlanta that just had to separate. So now there's two congregations. There's a white congregation and there's a
mm,
black congregation. But you can be a part of either one. It's not separate.
mm,
It's separated but not segregated. But one is from African American tradition and one is from, UU tradition. And so they had to separate. They couldn't meet in the middle. So that book, I would love to go through that book with y'all and some of these exercises that are in there that does that kind of reflective work about the congregation. That I mean, I love the individual work, but once you do the individual work, then you got to think about the congregation. So,
Yeah, there's some people will say that we can never achieve it because our community is so uh, disproportionately white. But even the small numbers that exist in our community, um, when you add them up, there's still dozens of African Americans and hundreds of people of color. So, with our small church, if we had 10 or 20 people of color join the church, it would be huge
right.
amount of integration in our church. And so I still have hope that we could move in that direction over time
Mhm.
uh, from where we are now.
Yeah.
And learning, I agree with Judy again. Learning here is the key. Learn what you don't know can hurt you
mhm.
or hurt society. So yeah,
Yeah.
Ignorance is not bliss.
I mean,
ignorance.
would that be
Ignorance
something
is
that y'all be
ignorance.
into? Like, like going over, I mean, going through some of those chapters and Mistakes and Miracles. I would love to. I mean, the next few months, I mean, could do it.
No, I think that's a great
Yeah,
idea.
it's a good idea.
I'd be up for that.
Okay. Yeah, I could probably
Mistakes
get a
and
discount.
miracles.
I could probably
I'll
get
order the book for the library, but I'll
it.
order one for me too.
And what I can do is like do it in like three parts, and one part we'll have we can do like a Zoom. We can do it in a Zoom event with the authors or one of the authors,
Oh, that would be great.
Did
one of the editors, I should say.
Vertus, has anybody mentioned to you the uh 1,000 cut journey?
That sounds familiar. Why?
So so we purchased, or not purchased, we acquired the rights to a it's a virtual reality program. It's about 10 or 15 minutes long. It was put together by an African American researcher, I think at Stanford or one of the Ivy League schools. And basically it's a, you hook it up to the computer and you put on the virtual reality goggles, and you assume the identity of a
Okay,
black person.
I've heard
And
about this. Yeah.
so I think there's 3 or 4 situations at various stages of the person's life. One is a kid, one is a teenager, one is an adult, where you get to experience from the perspective of an African American what prejudice looks like today. The so-called 1,000 cut journey, the 1,000 small little painful but small things that happen on a daily basis that people who are from the majority population don't experience and therefore may not be aware of. And what our plan was, and we have the equipment and we have the program and everything. What it would be we'd figure out how to get 15 or 20 or 30 people through the experience, and then have a session where we talk through what we experienced and the implications to that. And the research showed that uh, that program, going through that program and having discussion, has more impact to changing attitudes than going through like a 6 month education program,
Hmm.
because it gets you at an emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
So we're all set to do it. The bandwidth in our organization has been such that it just keeps getting kicked down the road. But we're committed to the foundation that funded this effort, that by the end of June, we're gonna hold this. And we tried to do it one summer and tried to focus on the community, but that was probably the wrong way to do it, because the community doesn't know us and is kind of resistant to this subject anyway. So now we're saying, let's do it with the congregation as a first step. And maybe if it's very successful, we can move beyond that. And we could ask people in our congregation to bring friends who might be interested in experiencing it too. So anyway, that's on our list of things to do over the next 4 months, which is related to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would think it would be a natural for you to be involved in that
Well,
process.
please,
We
please.
were also thinking of getting Fritz to come back to uh, that was the black psychologist from
Mhm.
New York City, to fly in for that, to facilitate that session if needed. So anyway, just something else to put in the queue.
Okay. And I have some so Fritz would be great, but I do have some local resources as well.
Great,
You know, because this is kind of before becoming a minister, this is what I did. So I have the connections, and that sounds fantastic. So count me on board. Like if y'all start having meetings, schedule some meetings, and let's get this going. I'm on board 100%.
great. Well, I got to run, folks, so I'm
Me
gonna I'm
too.
gonna sign off.
Okay.
This has been
Have
a
a good
great
week,
conversation.
everybody.
All right. Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon.
No problem.
All right, take care.